The shadows beneath the dock. Strangely magnetic about that dock. It wasn't the kind of place anyone else visited often. Weathered boards stretched out from the shore like brittle bones, warped and gray from years of rain, sun, and salt. The whole thing seemed too fragile to stand, yet it had stubbornly clung to the shoreline for longer than I'd been alive. Even in daylight, it gave off an air of unease, a sense that it wasn't truly part of the world anymore, but some fragment left behind, preserved by accident. Yet it was there, jetting into the water as if waiting for someone to notice it. And I did notice it, again and again every summer. Something about it always pulled me back. That evening, the pull was stronger than usual. The lake was quiet, unnaturally so, as if the woods had conspired to still their voices. I remember the air being heavy with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. It was the kind of scent that clung to the inside of your nose and coated your tongue, faintly sour, faintly sweet. I walked down the narrow trail, each footstep crunching on last year's brittle foliage. When the dock came into view, it seemed darker than the rest of the shoreline, as though shadows gathered there in ways the sunlight couldn't quite penetrate. The boards groaned beneath my weight as I stepped onto them. I could feel the softness of rot under my boots, the give of damp wood. Something moved beneath the surface of the water. Just the ripple of a fish, I told myself, though I hadn't seen a fish in that lake in years. The surface shivered, distorting the fading reflection of the sky. I settled at the edge with my fishing rod, not because I expected to catch anything, but because the ritual gave me a reason to be there. The line slipped into the water with barely a sound, swallowed immediately by the shifting black beneath. The air cooled as the sun slid behind the trees, and the dock seemed to settle into its own uneasy silence. It was then that I heard it, the faintest creak, like footsteps shifting weight on old wood. My mind wanted to place the sound behind me, but every time I turned my head, there was nothing but the empty stretch of dock, pale boards fading into mist. The sound wasn't steady. It came and went, an irregular pressure, as though something walked with no real direction, pausing, waiting, testing the planks. I kept telling myself it was the dock itself, the boards flexing, the water pressing against the supports. But the rhythm, it was too precise, too deliberate. The line tugged suddenly in my hands, a sharp pull that made the rod bend. Excitement sparked for a brief instant, followed almost immediately by dread. The pull was too strong, too sudden, as though something immense had seized the bait. My hands tightened around the reel as the line hummed, vibrating with strain. The water broke in a violent splash, but I couldn't see what had taken it. Just the churn of black water and the hollow sound of wood beneath me, straining as if something pulled at the dock itself. And then it went still. The line hung limp, slack as though it had been severed. I reeled it back slowly, the hook bent into a twisted shape I couldn't recognize. My stomach turned as I studied the metal. It looked as though it had been forced apart, warped by something with strength far beyond any fish. That was when I noticed the water. It wasn't just still, it was too still. The surface lay flat as glass, the reflections sharp and unbroken. No ripple, no insect breaking the surface tension, no breath of wind to disturb it. Yet as I stared down into it, I realized the stillness was wrong. My reflection was there, but not quite. The face that looked back up at me seemed pale, distorted, stretched beneath the surface as though pressed against invisible glass. Its mouth hung open wider than mine, its eyes too dark, too hollow. I blinked, and it blinked a moment too late. A fraction of a second, but enough to know it wasn't me. I jerked back, the dock swaying beneath me. The reflection vanished into black ripples. The footsteps returned, heavier this time, pacing just behind me though the dock remained empty when I turned. The boards shook, vibrating faintly under invisible weight. The air had grown colder. Not the gentle chill of evening, but a deep cold that seemed to creep from the water itself, seeping into my skin, crawling along my spine. My breath fogged in front of me, curling white into the darkening air. I tried to stand, but the dock groaned in protest, a long moan that vibrated up through my legs as though warning me to stay. The shadows thickened. They didn't just gather, they seemed to rise, seeping from between the cracks in the wood, spreading like dark stains. They curled along the planks, slow and deliberate, inching toward my boots. My pulse hammered as I stumbled backward, trying to retrace my steps toward the shore. Each step I took made the dock creak louder, echoing into the silence, until it was impossible to tell if it was my own weight or something else pacing me. And then I felt it, the boards behind me flexing, bending down as though something heavy pressed against them. The sound of water dripping, slow and steady, as if from wet footsteps I couldn't see. I wanted to run, but the air felt thick, pressing against me like water. The smell of rot and algae filled my lungs. I could hear the faint splash of movement beneath the dock, the dragging pull of something large shifting below the surface. When I glanced down between the slats of wood, I saw shapes, not fish, not anything natural. Pale limbs moving languidly, arms stretching where no swimmer should be. Hands brushing against the supports of the dock, fingers too long, bending at wrong angles. The lake whispered, not in words, but in a sound that felt like words spoken too low to hear, a resonance in the bones. It urged me forward toward the edge, toward the waiting water. My knees trembled, my body leaning before I forced myself upright, fighting the pull. The shore felt impossibly far away. Each step took an eternity, the boards screaming beneath me. The shadows licked at my ankles, and the sound of dripping footsteps stayed close, always a pace behind, no matter how fast I moved. The dock seemed to stretch longer, the shore retreating as though it didn't want me to leave. When at last my boots struck solid earth, I nearly collapsed. The forest was dark, the path swallowed by shadow, but it felt safer than what lingered behind me. I turned once, just once, and I wish I hadn't. The dock was still there, silent and empty, but beneath it, the water boiled. Faces pressed against the surface, pale and indistinct, mouths opening and closing without sound. Dozens of them, maybe more, all staring in my direction. The boards trembled as though holding back the weight of countless hands clawing upward. I fled. Branches tore at my clothes, roots caught my feet, but I didn't stop until the dock was gone from sight, hidden behind the trees. Even then, I could swear I heard the faint creak of footsteps on old wood, pacing steadily in the distance. I never returned to that lake, but sometimes, when the night is still and the air heavy with damp, I can hear it again, the slow, uneven tread of invisible feet, the sound of water dripping onto hollow boards. The dock is waiting, and the shadows beneath it are patient. Fishermen wait for all season. The water lay flat, a sheet of dull bronze reflecting the last light of the day. The air was heavy with the smell of mud and pine resin, thick with the faint sweetness of decaying reeds. Somewhere deep in the trees, a loon called, its cry stretching out like a warning carried across the lake. I should have paid attention to that sound. I rowed slowly, the oars dipping into the still surface with muffled splashes. The boat was old, its paint peeling in long strips, the wood beneath swollen and soft from years of damp. I had inherited it from someone I barely remembered, an uncle who'd drowned here decades ago. Nobody in my family used the boat anymore, but I had pulled it from the shed, patched the leaks with tar, and pushed it out into the water. I wanted to believe I could coax something from this lake, one last prize before the summer closed. The air cooled as dusk settled. The first fingers of mist unrolled from the shoreline, pale ribbons creeping over the surface. I could taste the dampness as I breathed, cool against my teeth, tinged with the faint metallic note of iron. The smell grew sharper the farther I rowed, as though the lake itself exhaled something stale and buried. When I dropped anchor, the silence was thick enough to feel. The rope groaned as it tightened, and the boat shifted slightly, rocking on the gentle motion of water. My line arced into the black surface, vanishing without a ripple. I sat there waiting, my ears straining for any sound beyond my own breath. It didn't take long. The rod bent suddenly, nearly jerking from my hands. The force was startling, too powerful for a lake this size. The line thrummed, vibrating with energy, as though something immense pulled beneath the surface. My chest filled with an almost childlike thrill, a pulse of victory, but it quickly soured into unease. Whatever I had hooked wasn't fighting like a fish. It pulled steadily, relentlessly, dragging the boat in slow circles. I braced myself, knuckles white on the reel, and felt the line cutting through the water like a wire. The lake stirred where it cut, spirals forming and dissolving, but no shape broke the surface. Minutes passed, the weight unyielding, pulling me into the deep without revealing itself. My muscles burned as I resisted, sweat prickling at my neck despite the cold air. Then came the sound. Not a splash, not a breaking wave, but a groan that rose from beneath, low and mournful, vibrating through the hull of the boat. It was the kind of sound that doesn't belong to any animal, a tone so deep it seemed to resonate in my bones. I froze, listening, my breath shallow. The rod bent farther, almost to breaking, as though the line had snagged on something enormous and living. The mist thickened, rolling in faster, curling around me until the shoreline vanished. I was adrift in a circle of pale fog, the water black and endless on every side. The air smelled stronger now, not just of iron but of rot, the stink of something bloated and waterlogged. My stomach turned, and for a moment I thought of my uncle. The way they said his body had been found days later, pale and swollen, hair fanned out like weeds in the current. The line went slack without warning. Relief washed over me for an instant, but it was short-lived. The rod sagged, then jerked violently in the opposite direction. Something surged beneath the surface, striking the underside of the boat with a dull, hollow thud. The wood shivered under the blow, paint flaking into the water. I leaned over the side, against every instinct, peering into the dark. At first all I saw was my reflection, distorted, wavering, but then the shadows shifted. Something pale drifted below me, a shape that moved against the current. It was long, too long, with limbs that bent slowly, drifting like strands of kelp. A hand, if it could be called that, unfurled beneath the surface, fingers extending into the water as if reaching for the boat. I stumbled back, heart hammering, the rod clattering against the side. The line snapped tight again, dragging the tip toward the water. My hands moved without thought, clamping down, trying to hold on. The groan returned, louder now, rising through the mist, a voice without words but full of hunger. The boat rocked violently, slamming side to side as though caught in a storm. Yet the water's surface remained strangely calm, unbroken except for the trembling line. I could hear the wood protesting, nails straining in their sockets. With each lurch, I felt closer to the edge, closer to tumbling into the waiting dark. And then it surfaced. Not fully, not enough to give itself away, but just enough. A face, pale and bloated, pushed up from the water, eyes black pits that stared without blinking. The mouth hung open, jaw distended too wide, strands of weed clinging like hair. It hovered for only a heartbeat before sinking again, but in that instant I knew. It wasn't a fish. It wasn't anything that belonged in this lake. It was something else, something that had been waiting below for longer than I could imagine. I tried to cut the line, fumbling for the knife at my belt, but the boat lurched so hard it slipped from my grip. The blade skittered across the boards, over the edge, gone in a quiet splash. My last tether to safety vanished with it. The line pulled again, sharper this time, and I realized with a sick certainty that it wasn't hooked on anything at all. The hook dangled useless, bent and empty. The line was wrapped around me. It coiled tight around my wrist, biting into the flesh, the fibers wet and slick but impossibly strong. I clawed at it, skin breaking beneath my nails, but it held fast. The pull came steady downward, toward the black water that waited just beyond the rim of the boat. I dug my heels into the wood, back pressed against the opposite side, the angle tearing at my arm. The smell of rot filled my lungs. The mist thickened, pressing close, damp against my skin. The groan rose higher, almost a wail now, a chorus of voices beneath the water. My body began to slide, dragged inch by inch across the boards. My boots squealed against the wet surface, leaving streaks of mud and blood. The rope cut deeper, burning cold into my wrist. I felt the boat tilt, water lapping over the edge, seeping across the floor. In that moment I knew the truth. This wasn't just about me. It had never been about fish or luck or skill. The lake had been waiting for someone to drop anchor, to cast a line, to tempt whatever slept below. My uncle hadn't drowned by accident. He'd been claimed, just as I was being claimed now. The water reached my legs, icy numbing. My hands clawed at the boards, splinters burying into my palms. The mist pressed close, thick as cloth, hiding the shore, hiding the stars. Only the water remained, and the pull, and the promise of something vast waiting just below the surface. The last thing I remember is the sound of the wood splitting, the boat tearing apart around me as though invisible hands ripped it open. I fell forward, the rope jerking me into the black. The water closed over my head, cold and heavy, swallowing the scream that never left my throat. And then silence. Only the groan of the lake remained, low and endless, as it welcomed me down.